there! Hey, thanks for tuning in. Today I'll be painting this Shire horse that I sculpted a few lessons ago. But before we get started, if you love art, then you might like to have a look at the other lessons at our website at www.montmart.net. We also have links to our Facebook and Instagram pages and our art club, The Creative Connection. So let's get into it. Now, although we'll be painting our horse in water mixable oils, the first step is to prime our horse with an acrylic. Now, we do this for a couple of reasons. As well as sealing the horse, it also provides a consistent layer for the oil paint to key onto. So let's get this acrylic on. If you have seen the first part of this lesson where I sculpt the Shire, you would have noticed that I've changed the neck and the braided mane to a natural mane. I got a bit of constructive criticism that it didn't look quite right, and I happened to agree, so I changed it. It is the same everywhere else though. So I start with ivory black acrylic and lay it over the mane, eyes, nostrils and tail. Keep the coat thin in this step as you don't want to lose too much detail. I decided to give my horse black legs as I saw quite a few examples of this coloration. The feathers on my friend will be a dirty white, but the transition of the black legs to the blood bay colouring looks really nice. Once the black is all in, I squeeze out some yellow pink. This will cover the muzzle and the rest of the head. As you apply the acrylic, remember that it's only the undercoat, so the coat needn't look overly finished. I create a liver colour from burnt umber, yellow pink and Payne's grey and paint it in around the mouth. Once this tone is in, I create a brown from yellow ochre and burnt umber and paint it into the feathers. The feathers will be dry brushed later on in the project, but we want a dirty tone down first. Once I'm happy with this, I squeeze out umber and burnt sienna. This will be the main body colour. Again, don't worry if the coat is patchy, it is more important for it to be thin. In fact, a patchy base coat makes for a better looking top coat. I paint the entire horse bar the head. From my experiments, the only way I could find to get an authentic looking blood bay colour is through building up tones through glazes. Now the body colour is laid in, we lay in the undercoat detail of the head. You'll need some fine brushes for this. I'm using brushes from the Mini Detail Taklon brush set, and I have to say that angled detailer is fantastic. It allows one to hold the brush at a much more comfortable position. I start by laying in the stripe down my friend's head. This marking is called a blaze, and it is common on all horse breeds. Don't make it too symmetrical though. I then paint the rest of the head in right up to my friend's blaze. Take it over the liver colour slightly. This will help with the colour transition. When you paint up to the blaze marking, leave a little of the pink show through in spots. It is subtle little nuances like this that add much to a model. Make sure you have as much reference as you can get too. Apply a very sparse coat over the ears as well, as they are very thin in structure. So I've got one base coat over Mr. Shire and it looks pretty good, but I'm going to create a glaze and lay it over his body, and that'll really bring out the deep chestnut colour. So let's get this glaze on. To create this glaze, I mix acrylic matte medium with burnt sienna and a touch of burnt umber. When you lay this coat on, it will look a little murky or milky, but on curing, the medium dries to a clear finish. Use a soft Taklon and again keep the coat thin. The more burnt sienna you use, the redder the tone will be. It is common practice when applying oil paint to figures and sculptures to extract some of the oil from the paint so it's not too slippery. To facilitate this, I lay some burnt sienna, burnt umber and Mars black, all in water mixable oils, onto a cardboard sheet. You can see how well this works. The first step in top coating is to cover the horse in a thin layer of straight burnt sienna. Next, lay pure burnt umber into the crevices or shadow areas and blend these into the previous coat, ensuring they transition into the burnt sienna at the high points. Next, you lay Mars Black into the very deepest areas and blend this into the burnt umber. Use a soft, fine round for this and keep the brush moving quite quickly. You can then lay on more straight burnt sienna into the very highest points and softly blend this in. I like to work in stages, complete one and then move to the next part. I will say, although this technique is relatively straightforward, don't overblend or your colours will all meld into one flat brown tone. And the whole idea of this exercise is to accentuate the form by exaggerating the shadow areas and highlights. I have learnt this from experience. It is also comforting to know you don't have to rush as water mixable oils dry very slowly. If you do overblend, of course you can carefully wipe the oil paint off and start over. And this is comforting to know also. With this step, the coat takes on a beautiful rich tone, and I remember the excited feeling I got as it took form. Water mixable oils also dry with a pleasing velvety finish, which is also in keeping with the natural luster of a horse's coat. When I come to the face, I take particular care to cut neatly around the eyes and basically soften the transition from the liver colour of the muzzle. I ensure the coat is as thin as possible and obviously use a small Taklon for this. I then blend in some burnt umber to accentuate the concavity of the skull and the area immediately around the eyes. I also blend burnt umber into the underside of the head and around the muscles of the cheeks. I lay a thin coat of Mars Black over the legs. This luster is more realistic as Mars Black is much warmer than Ivory Black and dries to a flatter finish. I detail my friend's muzzle with some flesh tone and leave some of the underbase tone show through for variety. I then add some zinc white over his blaze. The irises on a horse with brown eyes are basically undetectable, so I dry brush in a thin umber tone over the black base, and into this I add Mars Black and a titanium white highlight. Whilst I have the white, I dry brush it onto the feathers. Again, remove the excess off the brush onto a paper towel when you do this, so that it doesn't clog between the feathers. I then follow the same procedure with the mane, but in this case with umber. I then lightly dry brush his tail. This subtle handling creates more realism, as although his hair is black, black hair always has a brown highlight. I felt the feathers were a little stark, so I dry brushed a little Naples yellow over the white. So I'm pretty happy with how my friends come up, and I don't want to take the colour any further. The last thing I'm going to do is to create a muddy paddock environment for him. Now, to create really realistic mud, you need some soft pastels and some acrylic mediums. So this is how you make mud. There is literally hundreds of earthy mud tones. The one I chose came from one stick of umber and one stick of burnt umber. I also added a stick of sienna too, not shown here. I break the sticks up and crush them in a shallow bowl with the handle of a palette knife. Don't crush it into too fine a powder though. You want a few chunks visible as it makes the finished effect look more realistic. Lay this powder onto an easy clean wood palette. Pour in some matte acrylic medium and mix it all up. Add in small amounts of the medium until you're happy. You want it to be the viscosity of thickened cream. Draw a profile guide on the palette and using your trusty palette knife, ladle it into position and smooth it out level. You may choose not to go to this extent with your sculpture, but it's always handy to have a possible new technique in your armoury. You will notice the mix is a little bit milky. Again, this will dissipate once the medium cures. Once it's all spread out, fashion the faux mud so the surface is smooth. This of course will dry matte due to the matte medium used in mixing it, but if you use gloss, the mud comes out looking wet, and that could be good for certain situations too. Now it starts to get really exciting as I create hoof prints in the mud next to my friend. I use a stiff flat brush for this and ensure that they are the right size to have been made by his hoof. I then pour acrylic gloss medium into each hole. Be careful not to pour too much in though. This product is designed for glazing, so the thickness must be less than 0.5 of a millimetre. Otherwise, it may be milky and not 100% clear. Gently manipulate the medium right up to the edge of the hole. As I said, if used sparingly, it will go totally clear. It also self-levels if you let it dry unhindered. If you want slightly dirty water, you can add a touch of paint into the mix. The final step is to use some of that mud over his feathers, as realistically that mud is going to get transferred onto his feet at some point. See you next time!